from Kevin Durkin. Kevin is a partner at Clifford Law Offices in Chicago. He comes to mass torts from the plaintiffs side, and Clifford Law are one of the preeminent firms in the US for claimants litigation. He's been involved in nearly every major airline crash over the last 4 decades, often as lead counsel, and he's been named the 2025 Lawyer of the Year for Aviation Law and 2025 Lawyer of the Year for Product Liability Litigation by Best Lawyers publication. So it's a real privilege to have him here today. Thank you very much, Ken.
Thank you. Thank you for having us. Our founding partner, name partner Bob Clifford has shown up. And he's actually the lead counsel in the Boeing MAX litigation involving Ethiopian Airline 302. So it was interesting to hear Joel talk about this because this has become, this electronic evidence has changed so much since I started as a lawyer in 1980. I was a prosecutor for 8 years. Murder cases, all sorts of violent crimes. We were lucky if we had a bullet, a knife, or a gun to put in the courtroom. Now the type of evidence that's brought in is so compelling. And it brought me back to the first aviation case that I worked on in 1991, which was a Boeing 737 that was coming from Denver to Colorado Springs. Why would anyone take a plane ride for 60 miles? But they did, unfortunately, okay? And it was coming in parallel to Pikes Peak, landing, and it flipped over. And you know, these things help the defense bar where the plaintiff says, I was going 60 miles an hour, or hurts them when they're on a video game. But Boeing, back then, the 737 had only 8 parameters on the digital flight data recorder. None with the rudder, which is eventually what happened, was a rudder harbor where the rudder moved too far. So Boeing blamed it on a mountain rotor from Pikes Peak. A cloud, a wind, came from Pikes Peak and flipped over the plane, 737. Well, we started taking depositions and there was a parallel runway of a Cessna 172. That's like a tiny little plane. Came in at the same time and then it flipped over, okay? So what happened was out of that crash, then maybe they blamed it on the mountain rotor, and then maybe 6 months later on a calm day in Pennsylvania, coming into Pittsburgh, US Air 427 crashed and everybody died. And that's what started a movement by the National Transportation Safety Board to require more parameters on the digital flight data recorder. The so-called one of the 2 black boxes, they're actually orange, okay? Because they have to find them, right? So now this Boeing 737 MAX litigation was just, I'm sure many of you know something about it, but it's been a disaster for Boeing. We're going to get later about, and Bob can talk too about the PR that was done after the first crash line there. They'll get to the second. But it's been a disaster publicly for Boeing for their fines, criminal, we'll get to the criminal element of it. But so the first crash was Lion Air Flight 610, October 29, 2018 in Jakarta. Taking off from Jakarta, lost control, and there had been a problem the day before. And what the problem with this aircraft was is that Boeing had put in a new system called MCAS, Maneuvering Characteristics Augmentation System. But they forgot to tell the pilots about it, or the FAA, because it would have caused further certification. And they were competing with Airbus, the 320neo at the time. And the Airbus had just been, for the first time, American Airlines had ordered an Airbus, a 320neo, and Boeing was incensed. So corporate at the top, you get this thing certified. And when they entered this new system, that's going to delay certification with the FAA, okay? So what they did was they just didn't tell them about it, okay? One of the problems they had though, they had a manual, and they had it in a prior manual, and then they deleted it, but it had a footnote down at the bottom, 1, and explained what MCAS was, and they forgot to take the footnote out, okay? In the manual, believe it or not. So in this case, October 29th, 189 deaths, no survivors, 188 Indonesians, 1 Italian. That was pending in Chicago, okay? And we did not get involved in the case. I'll explain it a little bit, but you're right, Joe, hit it right at the machine.
At the last.
There we go. So the case is pending in the federal court in Chicago before Judge Thomas Durkin. 1 case left, okay? And that, there's something called the Death on the High Sea Act. And that plaintiff, under the Death on the High Sea Act, you're not allowed a jury trial in the United States. Plaintiff lawyers, we all want jury trials, right? You know, the bench trials generally do not have the same type of awards the jury might get. So just recently, the result was no jury trials. There's only 1 case left in that. There was a major controversy in that case. Tom Girardi, a very famous lawyer in the United States. Does anybody watch Housewives of Beverly Hills? Yeah, his wife was, what's her name? Erica. And Tom decided that he was going to settle many of these cases and keep the money. So he was ultimately sent over to the judge in the case, who I'm explaining to you why we're not involved now, happens to be my brother, okay? Tom Durkin, okay? We were called early on the case before he was assigned it. And Bob, I think we turned him down because what we find in some of these areas of the world, the lawyers want to be paid before, you know, that are referring to the case. And we just don't do that, okay? So we declined, and then my brother got in the case. So as you can see, it's like, we can't be in front of it. That's Tom, that's me. A lot of young people here, you're lucky you didn't grow up in the 70s, right? It was awful, okay? With my 7 brothers, mom and dad, okay? So the judge, we didn't practice in front of him at that point. He's a terrific judge, and he settled all the cases, and he really settled them by walking in. If the second case hadn't, we're going to get to the one we're involved in a second. If the second case hadn't happened, no doubt in my mind, well, very little doubt in my mind, that the form non-convenes, those folks would have been sent to Indonesia, okay, under our doctrine of form non-convene, with all those non-U.S. citizens, 1 Italian, and a lot of the evidence in Indonesia. The 2 major prior crashes before that, we were Air France, same thing happened, sent to France. We were involved in the Malaysian Air, and we represented the families of 2, and we settled those a couple of months before a new judge called Ketanji Jackson sent them to Malaysia, okay? Who's one of our Supreme Court justices. So here's where the problem. Right after the Lion Air case, Boeing knew exactly what happened. This software issue comes off what's called the angle of attack indicator. You know, the plane is like this, and you get normal levels, right? When a plane starts going up like this, you have what's known as an aerodynamic stall, okay? So there was a failure of the single angle of attack indicator in the Lion Air case and subsequently on the Ethiopian case. So what happens is, with this new software safety thing, I guess Boeing was thinking, if the angle of attack gets too high, we're going to have a software take the horizontal stabilizer, the bat, and dive the plane downward so it doesn't aerodynamically stall. The problem is the pilots didn't know about this, and that's what happened in both these cases. Is there was an issue with the AOA indicator, angle of attack indicator, and the plane just kept diving down. And perhaps like, what is going on at low altitude? They really had no way to get out of it. Okay. Now I'm going to tell you this. One of the things Boeing did right after was blame the pilots, the third world pilots. Well, it turns out Ethiopian Airlines has a pretty good operation and the major training for Africa. The pilots are pretty good, okay? And same with the Lion Air case, okay? So what Boeing did was eventually they said, well, American pilots could never would have happened. So they decided they were going to have Sully. Ever see the movie Sully? We're going to have Sully come in, get in our simulator, and recreate it. So Sully went out to the Boeing simulator for the 737 MAX, knowing the software problem, okay? Knowing it, and what happened? He crashed it, okay? So we called Sully to be an expert and talk to him. Just doesn't want to get involved in litigation, but we're a pretty good expert with this. So this is the real problem. They knew there was going to be another crash after Lion Air if this didn't get fixed. Now, this is, I can't give you a lot of the information because Bob and I took depositions of the engineers that were involved in this for weeks up in Seattle. And a lot of it's confidential, and the case is still pending, okay? But I can tell you what's in the public record. In the public record, we know this, that there was a report done that wasn't shared with the airline that even without a software fix, the likelihood of a crash increased after the following May of 2019. We hired a mathematician from MIT who did all their formulas. He said, no, I think it's going to be mid-March. He would have, and the second crash was March 10th. They really gambled with it. And that's one of the criticisms that's going on by our clients right now is they focused on the people who were before the first crash, but not the people that knew the problem and hid it from the aviation community, right? So that's March 10th, 2019. Addis Ababa to Nairobi. Takes off. 157 deaths, no survivors. There's 9 U.S. citizens this time. 35 different countries. Now this is probably the key element that we all have as aviation lawyers in the United States in transportation. There's conflicts of law, and I'm not sure how big it is for you folks, you know, but every state has a different principle of choice of law. If you file in Illinois, we follow a certain way of determining the law. If you file it in North Carolina, they do lex loci, wherever the accident took place, okay? So in Illinois, we filed the cases, but we had to deal with the choice of law damages for 35 different countries, which we'll explain in a little bit. I'll explain a little bit how we came about to make it workable and actually very successful for the plaintiffs. Okay? So that's pending in the United States District Court. Signed by Judge Alonzo and Magistrate Weiser, 2 terrific members of the judiciary in Chicago. 144 deceased filed cases. Boeing came out with and settled some without lawsuits, people beforehand. There's 28 cases remain. We started with 71 of the states, and we're down to 17 of our clients are still left. Now, why is Boeing in Chicago? Well, that's my office. That's Boeing. Okay, all right. They're just a couple blocks from the courthouse. That's where their corporate headquarters. And in our, you can always have jurisdiction if you go to the corporate headquarters of the defendant. Okay, and that's where it took place. Even though this accident took place in Ethiopia, we had jurisdiction against Boeing in Chicago because their corporate headquarters, they could walk the floor. It wasn't too inconvenient. All right. So, why are we in federal court, not state court? I always take this opportunity. There was after 9/11, our Congress had this terrific bipartisan attitude for about a year. Everything was getting passed almost unanimously. We were all for U.S., right? Well, there was a U.S. Department of Justice authorization appropriation bill, and in the middle of the night, it was about to get passed, and the senator from the state of Washington, where Boeing was headquartered then, said, "No, we need a new act to keep us in federal court." So any single accident involving 75 or more deaths ends up in federal court now in the United States. It's the Boeing Protection Act, okay? They don't want to be in state court. So that's why we're in federal court. And, you know, I always say the Patriots from Boeing, you know, got that in right at the close of the legislative session, and it's been to their advantage. Bob was quite frankly, our group, the trial lawyers, missed it, right, Bob?
They did it in the dark of night, no one.
Yeah, so they started giving compensation, financial to the families. They gave $144,500 to each family, to each deceased estate, and then they allowed them to make an investment in a charitable organization in their home country or wherever, as long as it's approved, and that was it. You know, you've heard of Montreal Convention, where you're traveling between the countries that are involved in the treaty. They each gave, Ethiopian Airlines gave each family $50,000 in advance. We can only get more if we file a suit, okay? We didn't want to file a suit against Ethiopian Airlines in the United States because we felt that that would have been a precursor to getting consolidated with Boeing and maybe transferred under foreign non-convenience to Ethiopia. So we didn't want to take that chance. So nobody did. We did extensive written discovery, 5,000 pages of documents. We went through those and found plenty of smoking guns that we used at depositions. We took almost 20 depositions of key Boeing employees, including the head of safety and that. What was going on at the time was they were getting more frustrated when we were taking the depositions. And they finally came to us to talk about a deal to get around this choice of law issue that we had. So we entered into a stipulation November 15, 2001. Boeing admit liability for compensatory damages, and every single person got the full measure of damages under Illinois law. Now, there's 50 states, and all have different laws about damages. Illinois is right at the top, okay, in terms of how generous they are to victims of tragedies like this, because of the different elements that we allow, okay? So we agreed not to pursue punitive damages. Why? Under all principles, they have a concept called decalage, where the judge looks at different states to determine compensatory damages. Normally they would go to the domicile. For punitive damages, you go to the corporate headquarters of the defendant or the place of misconduct. So we had two. We had Illinois corporate headquarters, and the max was manufactured in the state of Washington. Neither state allowed punitive damages for wrongful death. So we kind of thought we were not giving up a lot, okay? And ultimately the judge has now, in a separate case, come to that conclusion. So that was our bargaining chip. And at the end of the discovery is what it did of the Boeing executives. We hadn't hit the top yet, okay? But we were getting close to that. But our clients from these different countries like Ethiopia, where the wrongful death awards are $23 equivalent US. Kenya, 1,000. You think Canada would be more? The highest wrongful death settlement or wrongful death award in Canada is under $200,000. I can't tell you the amounts that we are settling our cases, are almost 50 so far, but obviously they're way, way better, and we're under strict orders for the time being until the case is over not to publish any of them, okay? But we do a lot of mock juries. I think we can talk about those, right, Bob? So if anybody here from Boeing is listening, we're going to trial in November. The numbers of the mock juries are astronomical, okay? So keep that in mind, okay? So the stipulation was that all these cases, this is the pattern instruction, just that the jury would be instructed that the airplane had an unsafe condition that caused by the Boeing. They don't blame anyone else. We didn't want them blaming the pilots still, okay? And they agreed not to do it. And it turned out to be a terrific stipulation. I don't take credit for it, Bob Clifford, okay? Bob Clifford worked it out with Boeing, and all clients except two have accepted, all plaintiffs except two have accepted the stipulation, and it's been a success for them. Now here's what's happened. Judge first set 8 cases for trial. These are the trial settings so far. Joel will tell you what's the best way to get a settlement. Set the case for trial, right? You know? And what's happened so far is the judge said 8 in the first round, 2 at a time, June 6th, November 6th, and all of them settled. We probably had like 16 of those cases are firm. And I believe they've all settled, some the day before. The people are in court coming in from Ethiopia, wherever, France, they were in here, Kenya. And we're going to trial again November 12th, 2024. I got to get the jury instructions in next week. We're preparing, I'll be taking a deposition this week about in London here of a client, okay? And we're going to have 5 cases set November, and then April 7th we're waiting for cases. How many? There's some cases where a large amount of two families from Canada, one of them lost his wife and 3 children under 7, and one lost 3 generations, 6 people, okay? And Boeing has not, I don't think they know what to do with those cases, so they're still around, and we're trying to get them to trial, and they're trying not to get them to trial, okay? So, this is the type of damages we get in Illinois that we got with this stipulation. Economic support, that's one of the big elements here, right? The finances, okay? It turns out to be one of the smaller ones. We get loss of services, loss of society. Loss of society is love, affection, a separate line item for a jury to decide. Love and affection, you know, they can, whatever the number is, right? The jury can decide it. Loss of consortium, loss of instruction, pain and suffering, what we don't, grief of the next of kin, different. So you lose your loved one and you recover for the loss of affection and love, but you also recover for your grief, separate determinations by the jury. When we go through these, there might be 6 line items, and we tell the jury, each one should be a separate trial. Figure out that number, then move on to the next one. Just don't throw a number on it. And usually that's how a lot of plaintiff lawyers do it. And the last one, pain and suffering and emotional stress. So what do these people go through, right? And you would be surprised. So they stipulated we could bring a survival action. That is what occurs to the decedent before they die, okay? It goes to the estate, not to the heirs, all right? So we have survival action in each of these cases. And this just shows again what happens. The nose gets too high, MCAS rotates the horizontal stabilizer and dives the plane down. So the plane basically thinks it's about to lose aerodynamic flight. So this system kicks in that the pilots don't know about. And this is actually what happened without an animation. We have animations, but the green line is the flight the day before on the very same plane from Addis Ababa to Nairobi. The red line is what these folks went through. You can see the terrain. You're at 1,000 feet above. The plane's going up, it's going down. And these people are going through this. And there's multiple gyrations of this. Worse than the worst roller coaster ride. The negative G's that people experience are negative 2 G's, where people weightless at 0. They're upside down, okay? But if they're strapped in, they feel like they're hanging from the ceiling, okay? The way they went through this for several minutes. And so what is that? what is the jury gonna give you for that? Well, I know what the mock jurors do, and they give you quite a bit of money. What do you think about it? Yeah, but so that's an element of, so those elements of damage are very, what our juries decide. And they're a little bit more subjective, you know, they just, what a jury feels, what's it worth for 3 minutes knowing you're about to die? You'll never see your loved ones. I don't know, for me, it's worth a lot, okay? If I was a juror, but that's what we I think that's what American juries feel too. So these are kind of experts that we have left. We have a digital flight data recorder expert who's recreated every movement of the aircraft that day that was relevant to our discussion. We hired a physiologist, an aerospace physiologist from the Air Force, retired colonel, who deals with planes with unusual attitudes with pilots that have to go through it and what their bodies go through. Medical doctor out, these are, Judge ruled medical doctor didn't have sufficient basis to testify. They had a few that are out too, okay? Something called Dalbert, you know, it's a site, it's a concept of the United States. We have a 737 captain who's terrific to talk about the movements of the aircraft and what she feels the passengers went through. And we have a biomechanical engineer talking about the interaction between the people with these G-forces on the seat belt, and their movements with these negative G-force, gravitational forces, okay? Boeing has basically the same, different titles. Boeing took the position, well, we really don't know what happened in the airplane, so we can't prove it, okay? All right. And of course, we don't have cameras. They had cell phones, these folks, but no one decided to try to salvage them in that wreck, and they buried them, okay? And you saw Joel, we don't know how many people made calls, right? We saw that with 9/11, what happened, right? And all those are lost. So we ended up, they say no, we argued it, and our judge issued a ruling that we can recover for pre-impact emotional distress they suffered. Okay, so that's the status of where we're at with that. I bring this up because I'm going to talk to you about, remember that day? It was in America history, one of the big days, right? Now, I don't want to be so anti-corporation, but even politicians, what do they try to do when they have news they want to hide? They pick a day where it's not going to show up in the news. So without telling the families and without letting anyone know, they signed an agreement. The Department of Justice signed an agreement with Boeing to basically take all the executives out of any criminal prosecution and plead guilty for 2 scapegoats that were doing flight tests, okay? So that was filed January 6th in a courthouse with a single judge in Fort Worth, Texas, that had absolutely nothing to do with anything, okay? Out of nowhere, without calling the families. And that's what's going on with the current litigation, besides what we're doing. There's something called the Crime Victims Act. And our Department of Justice is supposed to let crime victims know before they negotiate with a criminal or criminal enterprise, okay? And they didn't do it. And our Department of Justice said, well, they're not really crime victims. Bob talked to Merrick Garland, our U.S. attorney. Maybe you can tell us about that. Oh, you don't? Well, you had the car. You were running the call.
Well, yeah, so there's a thing called the deferred prosecution agreement that Boeing entered into with the defrauded the government, and we persuaded the families to challenge that. And so there's this thing, the Crime Victim Rights Act, that the families were denied that they were victims under that act. We hired a professor out of the University of Utah who's a noted scholar on it, and we are supporting the families in that. And we fought in the court of Texas and in the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals in America to give the families to fight over that issue. And the courts have ruled that these families are crime victims. Well, that changed the whole face of this. Ultimately, the original deferred prosecution agreement was thrown out. We had it thrown out. I had with the families a meeting with Merrick Garland, the Attorney General, and I said to him, Mr. Attorney General, if a police officer in Minneapolis, a woman, could go to jail for mistakenly using her weapon as opposed to her taser, what do you say about the head of a company, a CEO, who knowingly persuaded the then President of the United States and the head of the FAA to allow these planes to stay in the sky around the world, knowing another one could crash? And it did. We call that a federal manslaughter. What do you call it, Mr. Attorney General? He said, Bob, we're still studying. It was really kind of a lame response. But that said, now there's a new deferred prosecution agreement. We're still challenging that. There will be a hearing coming up soon in Fort Worth again. We'll end up in the Fifth Circuit. If there's any takeaway that I've had with the families, I do believe that if there's one company in America that's too great for the government to allow it to fail, it's Boeing. It's involved in our commerce in an incredible way, our aerospace programs, our military. But right now they're letting us slap them around pretty good. As Kevin has told you, we do a lot of mock trials. I think I hire every jury consultant in America other than ones that my pal Joel hired. By the way, how come that smart car didn't learn from those four cars? There
you go.
That said, Boeing's reputation in America is really in the tank. Just yesterday, their stock plummeted again another 7%. They've got 2 astronauts stuck in space right now on vacation. Hopefully, Elon Musk can get them back. We've been doing, in terms of how we don't have jury trials here. And we do these mock exercises as a way to, number one, figure out how to present the case. Number two, how to evaluate damages. What will a jury think? And our messaging. We do a lot of work with word sequence, sentence structure. Say it this way, don't say it that way. And a lot of that marketing information is telling us right now that there are words that are powerful. And we use that in our persuasion. So Kevin's talked about the rulings that the judge has made. The judge is going to allow us to tell the jury that these were preventable crashes. That word preventable is a word of power. And so those are the kind of things that we're doing right now. We can go on for a moment.
So they picked that date to get this news out, so the families knew nothing about it. We didn't know anything about it. Came out several days later. Well, got buried, right? Everything was done. Whatever happened there that day. Okay. So Bob talked about the criminal. They filed it in Northern Texas. This deferred prosecution agreement. What has happened is the Department of Justice is now, with the family's pressure, who've taken really unbelievable efforts they've made, has said that Boeing violated the deferred prosecution agreement. And when they violate that, then they're back up for charges, right? Full charges. Well, guess what? They worked out another deal with the Department of Justice, with basically the same, except there's going to be an external corporate monitor, okay? And a $250 million fine additional. So the families, that was just in the last couple of weeks. So the families are now objecting to that in front of this judge. what I think realizes he should, why they wondered, he seems to have wondered why was I picked to get this case out of nowhere on January 6th, okay? So, I'll just keep going with this. I mean, this is some of the things that were in the text messages or the messages at the airplane and this is before the Lion Air case when they're talking about MCAS. So I basically lied to the regulators, you know. One particular engineer that was involved with the MCAS said he kept using the word that he was jetty mind tricking regulators into accepting the training that they accepted by FAA. I think he said once they're dumber than a bunch of monkeys, the FAA, there's another one. And I really didn't even know what jetty mind tricking was. And then it turns out it's some guy thinks he's smarter than everybody else, okay? Well, this guy wasn't smarter than everybody else because he ended up being charged with a crime, okay? And this was what the original agreement said. They did pay $500,000. So they paid $1.4 million to each estate as part of a fine for the Lion Air and the Ethiopian Air. We did not take fees on those, on any of these. We told this was not part of our agreement, but we processed it for them. Some lawyers did, and shame on them, they didn't do anything, okay? And these are not set-offs. So when we try a case now, they're not a set-off to whatever the jury rewards. There's Forkner, this is the guy with the jetty mind tricking. He's a scapegoat for the large corporation. And a jury, whatever he's guilty of, the jury knew he was a scapegoat. And they were out about 2 hours and they let him go, okay? And this is the Crime Victims Act. They're supposed to confer with the attorney for the government. They have a reason why to confer, treated with dignity, right, be informed of any plea bargain. Well, our government said you're not a crime victim. Well, that changed, okay? That changed. Now they have the power. We kind of talked about these before. They've been arraigned now on the criminal charges, and now there's a new plea proposed. The family had been called to DOJ before that happened and said, we don't even have an investigation going on, okay? And then they end up with this deferred prosecution agreement without telling them. Merrick Garland, I was finding not guilty. We went through that. And then the judge basically says, you are crime victims, okay? And that's where everything changed. This is the families protesting. I think I'm to the right. I didn't make but they're protesting. These family members lost loved ones in the crashes. And then the judge then held, basically, the judge in Houston said that, in Fort Worth said that he had, there's not much more he can do except their agreement, okay? And that's what went up to the Fifth Circuit, and they remanded it. And at that point, that's when the Department of Justice decided we're just gonna say they violated, enter a new agreement. So that's basically what's going on with the deferred prosecution agreement. Running on a little bit of time. Any questions about the Boeing? Any of these cases? We're
You should tell people we think it's safe to fly.
well, you know, it's one of the most scrutinized aircraft of all time at this point, okay? And it's safe to fly because of MCAS. You know, one of the things with new aircrafts, I hate that you haven't been done this so long, is they seem to work out their kinks in the first 5 years, right? So you saw that with the 787, you saw that with the 777. And this is a brand new aircraft in 2000. The first one came out early 2018 to the public. So, I don't know, I'm not sure about it. It's safe because of MCAS, that's been fixed. Now they have a single failure it can't happen again. There has to be a double failure, angle attack, and the pilots know, and it won't take over like it did, okay? And they have an easy way to stop it if it stops, okay? So, it's not gonna happen because of MCAS again, in my view. So, what else, Bob?
Thanks very much, Kevin.
Okay.